I fertilized my garden for 20 years straight. Every spring, bags of fertilizer, compost by the wheelbarrow, bone meal, blood meal, you name it. I thought I was feeding my flowers. Turns out I was slowly killing their bloom. I'm 74 years old. I've been growing flowers for over 50 years, and the single most expensive lesson I ever learned had nothing to do with buying the wrong plant. It had to do with feeding the right ones too much. There's a group of perennials, stunning, long-blooming flowers, that actually perform worse when you give them rich soil. Some of them literally stop flowering if you fertilize them. And the craziest part? The plant I'll share at number 1 actually blooms 3 times harder in soil most gardeners would throw away. I'm going to share 10 of these plants today, ranked from surprising to absolutely mind-bending. But first, let me tell you how I figured this out. About 15 years ago, I was planting some blanket flowers along my front walkway. I had leftover plants, so I stuck a few extras near the driveway where the soil was mostly clay and gravel. I didn't amend that soil. I didn't fertilize it. I barely even watered them after the first week. Those forgotten plants outbloomed the pampered ones by a factor of 2. The ones in my carefully prepared, heavily composted garden beds grew lush green leaves and half the flowers. The ones in terrible soil, covered in blooms from June until November. That accident changed everything I thought I knew about growing flowers. And I started testing. For the next decade, I deliberately planted the same varieties in different soil conditions. Rich soil versus poor soil. Fertilized versus unfertilized. What I found shocked me. Some of the most beautiful perennials on earth are programmed to bloom harder when they're stressed. When you pamper them, they get lazy. They put energy into leaves instead of flowers. When you let them struggle a little, they bloom like their survival depends on it. Because in nature, it does. Here are 10 perennials that will actually punish you for being too generous with fertilizer and reward you spectacularly for doing almost nothing. Number 10. Yarrow. Common yarrow is one of those plants that most gardeners walk right past at the nursery. That's a mistake. The variety moonshine produces flat clusters of bright yellow flowers from June through September on silvery, fern-like foliage. 4 months of bloom. But here's the thing nobody tells you. If you plant yarrow in rich, amended soil and fertilize it regularly, the stems get tall and floppy. They fall over in the first summer rain. The plant looks like a mess by July. Now plant that same yarrow in average to poor soil. No fertilizer, no compost. The stems stay short and sturdy. The plant holds its shape all season, and the flowers, just as many, just as bright, on a plant that actually looks good instead of flopping over like wet laundry. I've got yarrow growing in a strip of gravel next to my garage. I haven't done a single thing to that soil. Those plants bloom beautifully every summer, and I don't touch them except to cut them back once in late fall. Yarrow is also one of the best plants for attracting beneficial insects. Ladybugs, lacewings, hoverflies, they all love those flat flower clusters. Plant yarrow, and you're basically hiring a pest control crew that works for free. Plant them 18 inches apart in full sun. Well-drained soil is essential, and please don't fertilize them. You'll regret it. Number 9. Sedum. Specifically, the tall varieties like Autumn Joy. This is a plant that stores water in its thick, succulent leaves, which means it already has everything it needs to survive neglect. Sedum. Autumn Joy blooms from August through October. 3 months. The flower heads start out pink, deepen to rose, then turn coppery bronze as fall arrives. Each stage is beautiful. And here's why sedum hates fertilizer. Rich soil and extra nitrogen cause the stems to stretch and weaken. Instead of that tight, upright mound of flowers you see in magazine photos, you get tall, floppy stems that split open in the center. The plant literally falls apart. I learned this the hard way. My first sedum planting was in a bed I'd heavily amended with compost and fertilized every spring. By August, the center of every plant had collapsed outward. It looked terrible. I moved divisions of those same plants to a dry, unfertilized spot near my mailbox. Same variety, Same sun, different soil. The ones in poor soil stayed compact, upright, and covered in flowers all fall. Sedum is also one of the last plants butterflies visit before winter. In October, when almost nothing else is blooming, you can count a dozen butterflies on a single sedum plant. Those late-season pollinators desperately need that nectar. Plant sedum 18 to 24 inches apart in full sun. Any soil that drains well. Don't water them once established unless you're in a severe drought, and absolutely do not fertilize. Number 8. Catmint. Walker's low catmint is a plant I've talked about before because it's that good. 6 months of lavender blue flowers from late April through October. But here's something most people don't realize. Catmint actually prefers poor soil. In rich, fertilized ground, catmint grows too fast. It gets leggy. The mound opens up and loses that beautiful rounded shape. The stems flop. You end up with a messy sprawl instead of a tidy cloud of blue. In lean soil, catmint stays compact. The growth is denser. The flower production is just as heavy, but on a plant that keeps its shape all season. I've got a row of catmint along my front walkway planted in completely unamended soil. I haven't fertilized it in 12 years. Every June, it looks like a blue river flowing along the path. Here's the only maintenance catmint needs: one haircut. In mid-July, when the first flush of flowers starts to look tired, take your head shears and cut the entire plant back by half. 5 minutes of work. 2 weeks later, fresh growth pushes out and you get a completely new round of flowers that lasts until frost. That's it. One cut per year. No fertilizer, no fussing. 6 months of bloom. Bees love catmint so much that on a warm afternoon you can hear the humming from across the yard. And deer absolutely avoid it. That aromatic foliage that smells like mint when you brush against it. Deer hate it. Number 7. Blanket flower. This is the plant that started my whole no fertilizer experiment. Blanket flower, the variety Arizona sun, produces red and yellow flowers that look like tiny sunsets. It blooms from June through hard frost, which means 5 months of color in most gardens. And it does this best in the worst soil you've got. I'm not exaggerating. I've run this experiment in my own garden for over a decade. Same variety, different locations. Every single time, the plants in poor, lean, gravelly soil produce more flowers than the ones in rich soil. It's not even close. Here's why. Blanket flower is native to the prairies of North America. In the wild, it grows in sandy, dry, nutrient-poor ground. When you give it rich soil and fertilizer, you're confusing it. The plant responds by growing leaves, big, lush, green leaves, and very few flowers. Take away the fertilizer and the poor soil, and the plant thinks it needs to reproduce. So it blooms, aggressively. Blanket flower is also one of the most heat-tolerant perennials you'll find. I've watched it bloom through weeks of 95-degree temperatures without a single wilted petal. Drought? No problem. Deer? They won't touch it. Rabbits? Same thing. The one thing that will actually harm a blanket flower is too much kindness. Rich soil, regular fertilizer, frequent watering. That's the recipe for a blanket flower with lots of leaves and almost no blooms. Plant them 12 to 15 inches apart in full sun. Lean soil. No amendments. Water them weekly for the first summer to establish roots. After that, leave them alone. Number 6. Russian sage. This is a plant for people who want to do absolutely nothing and still have a gorgeous garden. Russian sage blooms from July through October. 4 months of lavender blue flowers on silvery aromatic stems that can reach 3 to 4 feet tall and equally wide. And it despises rich soil. I planted Russian sage 13 years ago in the worst spot in my garden. South-facing wall, full afternoon sun. Soil that was basically compacted clay with a little sand mixed in. I didn't amend it. I didn't fertilize. I watered it that first summer. Then I stopped. That plant has bloomed for 4 months every single year for 13 years. Not once has it had a pest problem. Not once has it had a disease. Not once has it failed to flower. Meanwhile, a gardening friend planted the same variety in his beautifully amended, regularly fertilized perennial bed. His Russian sage grew tall and floppy, fell over every rainstorm, and bloomed for maybe 2 months instead of 4. The rich soil made it weak. The aromatic foliage smells like sage when you crush it. Deer and rabbits won't go near it. Bees and butterflies absolutely love the flowers, especially late in the season when other nectar sources are drying up. The only maintenance is one hard pruning in late winter. Cut it down to about 6 inches above the ground before new growth starts. It seems harsh, but it's necessary. Without that annual cut, the stems get woody and bloom production drops. Plant Russian sage 3 feet apart. Full sun. Poor to average soil that drains well. Don't fertilize. Don't water once established. Just step back and let it work. Number 5. Lavender. English lavender, specifically the variety Hidcote, is a plant that most gardeners kill with kindness. They plant it in rich soil, water it regularly, and fertilize it like any other perennial. Then it rots. Or it grows leggy and stops blooming. Or it gets fungal diseases and dies. Here's what lavender actually wants: poor soil, excellent drainage, full sun, and absolutely no fertilizer. Lavender is native to the rocky, thin soils of the Mediterranean coast. In the wild, it grows in limestone, gravel, and sand. When you give it rich garden soil, you're creating conditions that are nothing like its natural habitat. The roots stay too wet. The growth gets soft and disease-prone. The plant produces foliage instead of flowers. I killed 3 lavender plants before I figured this out. The 4th one, I planted in pure sand mixed with a little garden soil next to a south-facing stone wall. No compost, no fertilizer. I watered it only during its first summer. That plant thrived. It bloomed from June through August, covered in those iconic purple spikes that fill the air with fragrance. After 3 years, it was a dense, silvery mound 2 feet wide, covered in bees every sunny afternoon. The trick with lavender is thinking like a Mediterranean hillside, not a pampered garden bed. If your soil is heavy clay, plant lavender in a raised bed with added gravel, or mound the soil up to improve drainage. Never mulch lavender with wood chips. Use gravel instead, and never, ever fertilize it. Number 4. Coreopsis. Threadleaf coreopsis is a native wildflower that proves you don't need expensive soil amendments to have months of color. The varieties Moonbeam and Zagreb bloom from June through October, 5 months of cheerful yellow flowers on delicate thread-like foliage that forms neat little mounds. And just like blanket flower, coreopsis blooms better in poor soil. I tested this directly. I planted Moonbeam coreopsis in 2 locations. One in my vegetable garden where the soil was heavily amended with compost, regularly fertilized and consistently watered. The other in a neglected strip along the fence where the soil was sandy, unfertilized, and bone dry most of the summer. The results were dramatic. The ones in rich soil grew lush foliage, dense, green, and healthy looking, but they produced maybe half the flowers of the poor soil plants. The neglected ones? Absolutely covered in blooms. Hundreds of small yellow flowers on each plant, so many that you could barely see the foliage underneath. The reason is the same as blanket flower. Coreopsis is a prairie native. It evolved in lean, dry conditions. Rich soil tells the plant to invest in vegetative growth. Poor soil tells it to reproduce, and it reproduces by flowering. Plant coreopsis 15 to 18 inches apart in full sun. Sandy or average soil. No fertilizer, no rich compost. Water weekly the first summer. After that, leave them alone. After about 5 years, if the center of the plant starts to die out, dig it up in spring, divide it, throw away the dead center, and replant the healthy outer pieces. This rejuvenates them completely. Number 3. Butterfly weed. This is a plant that transformed my understanding of what poor soil can produce. Butterfly weed is a native milkweed with clusters of brilliant orange flowers that bloom from June through August. And it doesn't just tolerate poor soil, it demands it. In the wild, butterfly weed grows in dry prairies, rocky roadsides, and sandy fields. The kind of places where most garden flowers would simply give up. It develops a deep taproot that reaches down into dry, compacted soil and pulls up enough moisture to bloom brilliantly, while everything around it withers. I tried growing butterfly weed in my amended garden beds. It survived, but it was never impressive. Modest growth, a few flowers, nothing to write home about. Then I planted some in a rocky, dry patch of ground near the edge of my property. No amendments, no fertilizer, no supplemental water after the first month. Those plants exploded. Within 2 years, they were covered in vibrant orange flower clusters that attracted every monarch butterfly in the neighborhood. I've watched monarchs migrating through in fall stop at these plants to refuel. It's one of the only plants that monarch caterpillars will feed on. So planting butterfly weed isn't just gardening, it's conservation. Here's the critical rule. Never fertilize butterfly weed. Fertilizer can actually harm the plant, and never try to transplant it once established. That deep taproot resents being disturbed. Plant it where you want it, give it 1 summer of weekly watering, then leave it alone for the rest of its life. It'll reward you with years of brilliant color and a garden full of butterflies. Plant butterfly weed 15 to 18 inches apart in full sun. Sandy, rocky, or gravelly soil is ideal. Clay works too, as long as it drains. This plant is hardy from Zone 3 through Zone 9, which covers almost the entire continental United States. Number 2. Gaura, also called Lindheimer's bee blossom. This is one of the most graceful perennials you'll ever see, and one of the most misunderstood. Gaura produces delicate white or pink flowers on airy, wand-like stems from May through October. 6 months. The flowers look like tiny butterflies dancing in the breeze. It's mesmerizing. And Gaura hates being pampered. In rich, fertilized soil, Gaura grows too fast. The stems get tall and weak. They flop over. The plant looks untidy and the bloom period shortens because the plant puts energy into those oversized stems instead of flowers. But plant Gaura in lean, dry, unfertilized soil, and something magical happens. The plant stays compact, the stems are sturdy enough to hold themselves up, and the flowering goes on for 6 months straight without a moment's pause. I discovered Gaura about 8 years ago when a friend gave me a few divisions. I planted them in a spot I was honestly embarrassed about. Thin soil over gravel near a retaining wall, hot, dry, neglected. I expected them to die. Instead, they became the most talked about plants in my garden. Visitors in July and August would stop and stare at the dancing flowers catching the afternoon light. Gaura develops a deep taproot, similar to butterfly weed, which makes it incredibly drought-tolerant once established. It also makes it difficult to transplant, so plant it in its permanent home from the start. Deer don't bother it. It has no significant pest or disease problems, and it self-seeds gently, giving you new plants that pop up in nearby spots. Plant Gaura 2 feet apart in full sun. Well-drained, lean soil, no fertilizer, no amendments. Water the first summer to establish that taproot, then walk away. Number 1. California poppy. Now, before you say this is an annual, let me stop you. In mild climates, California poppy is a short-lived perennial that returns year after year. And even in colder climates, it self-seeds so reliably that it's effectively perennial. Once you plant it, you never have to plant it again. But that's not why it's number 1. California poppy is number 1 because it demonstrates the principle of this entire video more dramatically than any other plant I've ever grown. In poor soil with no fertilizer and almost no water, California poppy produces carpets of brilliant orange, gold, and yellow flowers from April through October. 7 months. 7 months of non-stop color from a plant that costs almost nothing and asks for even less. Here's the experiment that blew my mind. I scattered California poppy seeds in 2 locations. One was a prepared bed with good garden soil that I kept watered and weeded. The other was a bone-dry strip of decomposed granite along my driveway. Terrible soil. No amendments, no irrigation, no care whatsoever. The ones in the good bed grew tall, leafy plants with decent flowers. Nothing wrong with them. The ones in the decomposed granite, they created a river of orange that stopped traffic. Literally. My neighbor across the street called to ask what I'd planted because her visitors kept slowing down to look. In poor soil, California poppies stay compact. The foliage is a beautiful blue-green, finely cut like lace, and the ratio of flowers to foliage shifts dramatically toward flowers. The plants bloom so heavily that the entire ground surface turns orange. California poppies are native to, obviously, California, but also to Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Arizona, and parts of Mexico. They're adapted to the dry, rocky, nutrient-poor soils of the western United States. They evolved to bloom profusely in conditions that most gardeners would consider impossible. And here's the final secret. Don't deadhead them. Let the seed pods form and scatter. By the second year, you won't have a row of poppies. You'll have a meadow. The plants fill in bare spots, pop up in cracks, and create a self-sustaining carpet of color that comes back every year without you lifting a finger. Scatter seeds in fall or early spring directly on the soil surface. Don't cover them. They need light to germinate. Full sun. Poor to average soil. No fertilizer. No amendments. Minimal water. That's it. After 50 years in the garden, the lesson I keep relearning is the same one. Sometimes the best thing you can do for a plant is absolutely nothing. We spend money on fertilizer, compost, soil amendments, special feeds, and bloom boosters. And for some plants, all that generosity makes things worse. The 10 plants I shared today don't want your help. They want your neglect. They want the worst corner of your yard, the spot you've given up on, the soil you're embarrassed about. Give them that, and they'll give you months of flowers that make your neighbors wonder what your secret is. Your secret? You stopped trying so hard. I'm 74 now. I don't have the energy to fuss over a garden the way I did at 40, but my garden has never looked better, because I finally learned that the best gardener isn't the one who does the most. It's the one who knows when to do nothing at all.